of September 28th, the Emeryville Planning Commission. Could we have a roll call, please?
I believe Commissioner Banta will be joining us shortly. Commissioner Guerrero.
Here.
Commissioner Kang.
Here.
Commissioner Keller.
Here.
Commissioner Thompson has an excused absence this evening. Vice Chair Barrera.
Here.
And Chair Donaldson.
Here.
We have a quorum of 5 commissioners present.
And Commissioner Banta is approaching.
We have a quorum of 6 commissioners present. Commissioner Banta.
Great. Okay, this is a time for public comment for any items that are not on tonight's agenda. We originally had 3 items on our agenda tonight, but the Ocean View Townhomes study session has been postponed to a later date. Seeing no public members coming up to comment, we'll move on to the action recap. Any changes, corrections, or motions?
I move approval. Second.
Okay.
I'm sorry, who was the second?
Commissioner Guerrero.
Moved by Commissioner Keller and seconded by Commissioner Guerrero. Do you want a roll call on that?
Might as well. I think we have an abstention.
Oh, that's right. We do have a couple of abstentions, don't we? So Commissioner Banta?
Aye.
Commissioner Guerrero?
Aye.
Commissioner Kang?
Abstain.
Commissioner Keller?
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson is excused. Vice Chair Barrera?
Aye.
And Chair Donaldson.
Aye.
So that passes with 5 ayes, 1 abstention, and 1 excused.
Great. Okay. And may we have the director's report, please?
Yes, so last month I gave you a very short report because the City Council doesn't meet in August, so they made up for it with their last 2 meetings in September, so I now have a rather lengthy report for you on their September 5th and September 19th meetings. On September 5th, the Council held a study session on the budget and gave direction for its preparation for the operating budget for the next 2 fiscal years. The Council held a study session on the Doyle Street Mews project, which is before you tonight for your recommendation to the City Council, and Navarre will be giving you more details about that in her staff presentation. The Council adopted regulations governing the issuance of dispensary retail permits for cannabis businesses and approved a request for qualifications for a permit for a storefront dispensary. The Council approved a contract with Community Design and Architecture for a concept design for the 40th and San Pablo Transit Hub. They approved an affordability agreement for 1 affordable unit of the 6 new units in the Artistry project at 6401 Shellmound Street. As you may recall, that project was approved by the Commission on February 23rd. They approved a contract with CDM Smith to update the citywide parking management plan. This is the first step before implementing citywide parking meters. The Council considered regulations to implement the Fair Workweek ordinance and directed that an ordinance be prepared to amend the Fair Workweek ordinance to add exemptions to the requirements for predictability pay, and that ordinance will be presented to the Council for first reading on October 3rd. The Council approved a request for proposals for a pilot mural project along the Emeryville Greenway between Powell Street and Stanford Avenue. The Council introduced an ordinance amending the building regulations to add a provision for expedited processing of permits for electric vehicle charging stations as required by state law. That ordinance was passed on September 19th. And in response to my director's report on actions at the Commission's August 24th meeting concerning the mobility cell phone antenna applications, staff was directed to research what other cities charge for such facilities on city streetlight poles and to prepare an update to the master fee schedule accordingly. This item is tentatively scheduled to be considered by the Council in November. So that was September 5th. On September 19th, the Council approved a finding of public convenience or necessity for New Seasons Market at the public market to sell alcohol. This is it's kind of a pro forma thing, but it's required by the State Department of Alcoholic Beverages Control, and the Council passed that on consent without discussion. However, there was a lot of discussion about the public market noise waiver that had previously been approved by the Council for Saturday work. They revoked that noise waiver because work had started before 10 a.m. on 2 Saturdays. The council introduced an ordinance to amend the planning regulations related to accessory dwelling units. As you may recall, those of you who were on the commission, this was previously considered and recommended for approval by the Planning Commission on March 23rd. The council considered it on May 2nd and directed staff to further analyze the need for lot coverage limitations. After researching this issue, staff concluded that no such limitations are necessary because existing setback regulations limit lot coverage already. However, in adopting the first reading, the council did add a provision for a minimum of 200 square feet of open space with a minimum dimension of 10 feet for lots that are proposing new attached accessory dwelling units, new detached ADUs. The second reading of this ordinance is scheduled for October 3rd. The council approved a request for qualifications for a public art installation at the Emeryville Marina. And finally, the council approved the operating budget for fiscal years 2017-18 and 2018-19, which will result in the layoff of 2 staff members in the Economic Development and Housing Division in the second year of the budget. In other matters, I want to call your attention to a couple of upcoming events. One is hot off the press, just scheduled. As you might know, there is a provision in the municipal code about lead safety. This is really more of a building code issue. We've been directed by the council to schedule training on this. And that training has been scheduled now. It's an all-day session, and it's free. It will be at ECCL on Wednesday, October 25th from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. This is for any residential property built prior to 1978. If anybody does work on it that has the potential to disturb paint that could have lead in it, is required to be certified. And in order to be certified, you have to take this training. So we are offering that free of charge on Wednesday, October 25th. However, it's limited, I think, to 30 people. So the first 30 who sign up for it. Secondly, the 3706 San Pablo Avenue Affordable Housing Project, which, as you may or may not have heard, is now being called Estrella Vista, which means star view, i.e. view of the star intersection. Get it? Anyway, that project, Estrella Vista, 3706 San Pablo, is having a grand opening on Wednesday, October 11th at 11 a.m.
Grand opening or groundbreaking?
I'm sorry. Grand opening of the groundbreaking.
I was hoping it got built without me knowing.
That's what I meant. Groundbreaking, yes. Thank you. That's Wednesday, October 11th at 11 a.m. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to respond to any questions you may have. A lot of stuff.
Any questions for the director? Okay, thank you very much. We now move on to disclosure of conflicts of interest and ex parte communications.
I had a short email with Mark Steffens of City Center Properties on the Marketplace regarding the property adjacent to the 5850 Shell Mountain project.
Nothing to report.
I have had none either, so move on to our first and only public hearing for the evening. It's Doyle Street Muse. Thank you, Navarre.
Good evening.
Hi.
All right, good evening, Commission. We have a fairly thorough presentation before you, so let's get started. So this is for the Doyle Street Muse project to demolish 4 existing legal residential units and 2 existing illegal residential units and replace them with 6 new residential units. Here is the site location, just south of 59th Street on Doyle Street. So as I said, this is to demolish existing residential units and replace them with 6 new units, all of which are 3 bedrooms. It also includes 1 vehicular auto parking space per unit and a total of 14 bicycle parking spaces as well. So here's some images of the existing structures at this place and the proposed replacement. So for background, In April 2016, Planning Commission saw this project for the first time. At that time, the applicant was proposing obtaining the required bonus points through having the project be zero net energy, as well as family friendly. And there were concerns raised about the feasibility of that, as well as existing trees on the north side of the property. And unit and project design overall feedback was provided. In August 2016, the Planning Commission held a second study session about this, and the bonus points proposal was revised at that point for 50 bonus points for family friendly and 50 bonus points for supporting the citywide small business fund. Concerns continue to be raised about the potential impacts of the redwood tree on the north side of the property from the new development, and there was additional unit and project design feedback. In November 2016, this went to City Council for the first time, and they were generally supportive of the project and raised similar issues for design and materials and the preservation of the redwood tree to the north, and deferred back to Planning Commission for direction on those topics. So in July of this year, in July 2017, came back to Planning Commission for the third time. At this point, there was a new architect who had modified the design and provided more project details, and the Commission was generally supportive of the project, and comments at that time included, again, design and materials and modifying the ground floor facade. So the applicant updated the plans for family-friendly design information. More details have been provided since you last saw this project. Parking information, windows were added, plantings to address the ground floor facade area. So this then went to City Council earlier this month in September, and the City Council, as Charlie mentioned in his report. So the Council discussed the character and scale of the project and directed that the project must include protection for the trees, especially the coast redwoods on the north side of the project. So the conditions of approval for this project require a tree protection plan, which involves arborist participation in pre-demolition and pre-construction meetings, and arborist oversight of the project as well. The city consulting arborist was part of creation of those conditions of approval. They were heavily involved in that to make sure that they would adequately cover all aspects of tree protection. The City Council also requested that be looked into as an alternative to supporting the small business fund to provide one of the units as affordable as a flexible bonus point option. So there was analysis done on that. It's outlined in your staff report. It's quite detailed, but basically this is not financially feasible. The cost of that far exceeds what's required to obtain bonus points for this project. So project revisions, since you've seen this, I'm going to go over them briefly at the beginning of the presentation. A parking detail sheet has been added. Tree protection zone info has been incorporated into the plans. Doyle Street elevations showing neighboring buildings have been added. Family-friendly details have been added. And elevation and rendering showing changes to the ground floor facade per Planning Commission and City Council feedback have been included as well. So here's a site plan for parking. The stripey area is a driveway with showing that the widths are per our code, and the orange areas are vehicular auto parking. The kind of pinkish areas here are for indoor bicycle parking for the front 4 units. Those can kind of accommodate at least 2 bicycles each. The rear units have 1 interior parking space, and then there's 4 guest parking spaces in the back. The main difference between what you saw before and this is that the number of guest parking spaces have been reduced to make sure that there's adequate circulation and there's room for larger bikes such as a cargo bicycle or to park a guest trailer, for example. So here's the tree protection area. So here in the dark area, this is the primary root plate, and that's where if you disturb the roots in that area, it can cause stability problems with the actual tree and severely compromise the tree. And then the larger areas, these are all estimates. I just want to remind everybody, the estimated area of potential full tree zone where you have to look out for roots and make sure that their impacts are mitigated so the tree isn't damaged. And then there's other neighboring trees to the back, some juniper and a street tree here, and those are also shown. Here you can see that the only 1 unit goes into that primary root protection area, but 3 of all the north building are within the root protection area overall for the redwood trees. So again, that's being addressed in the conditions of approval. Here's an elevation from Doyle Street showing the closest buildings on either side of this project. And then the family-friendly design guidelines, each unit is now shown separately in the plans with notations about how the family-friendly design guidelines are met in different areas of each unit. So just walking through those for you here. And then here's the revised facade. So a window has been added here on the north building, addressing, and then some plantings here to provide a little bit more depth and texture to the front facade. And then you'll see as the rest of the building, both of the buildings are not mirror images of each other. They have slightly different design features on each building. And so this one has 2 windows instead of 1 window. So the site plan remains the same since you've seen it before. The trash enclosures are still at the front. This was done in consultation with Waste Management, who collects our trash, and Public Works Department, and meets all of the requirements for sizing and siting from both the city and Waste Management. The landscaping is basically the same as you saw it last time, with some slightly modified plantings in the front here. And here's the Doyle Street west elevation. So as you're walking, if you were across the street on Doyle Street, this is what you would see. This is from the rear, so if you were property in the back. This is the north facade, so closer to 59th Street. And this would be the south facade, which would be closer to the Townhouse Grow. This is the center driveway, if you were in the center driveway between the 2 buildings facing north. And this is the center driveway facing south. And this is Doyle Street, kind of northeast view of both buildings. And this is if you were going to walk down the center driveway from Doyle Street facing the rear of the property. And here's from the back. So the only slight modification here is that there's 2 racks, not 4. It's 4 parking spaces, 2 racks. So for general plan, the general plan identifies this as an area of stability. It's also in the mixed use with residential zone, where mix of use is not required because it's less than 1 acre. And it's just outside the transit hub overlay. It's also a part of the North Hollis overlay zone. So let's walk through that real quickly. So areas of stability, according to the general planner, those parts of the city that are not anticipated to change significantly in character, land use, or development intensity over the next 20 years. So demolition of existing buildings and construction of new buildings are not prohibited in areas of stability. And it's likely that many projects in this area could potentially need to have demolition if they were to add units just because of site constraints. So areas of stability don't prohibit that. The proposed Doyle Street Muse project is consistent with the character, land use, and development intensity of the area, and therefore conforms to the general plan designation of this neighborhood as an area of stability. And so here's that map that I'm referring to, with the red circle roughly indicating the project site in this gray area. And you can see that this whole area between Doyle and Vallejo Street is in that area of stability. So the general plan also identifies this area as a mixed use with residential site, and you can see that pink little area there in the red circle, and that the blue dotted line indicating the major transit hub goes right up the front of it, but the properties aren't actually within it. And then the North Hollis overlays I talked about. That will also come up again because there's specific design guidelines, so we'll talk about that a little bit more in the presentation moving forward. So for zoning, mixed use with residential, consistent with the general plan, and North Hollis overlay, again, consistent with the general plan and does not modify any of the permitted uses in the area. So here's the zoning map, again, very similar to the general plan map. And the North Hollis overlay is indicated by the thick black line here. So for zoning analysis, this area has a base FAR of 0.5 with a bonus of up to 1.0, and the applicant is proposing a floor area ratio FAR of 1.0. For residential density, it's a base of 20 units per acre and up to 35 units per acre with a bonus. The applicant is proposing 26 units per acre, which translates to 6 units. And the maximum building height is 30 feet. There's no bonus available, and the applicant is proposing 30-foot buildings with a 3-foot parapet, which is provided in our design guidelines. So the FAR requires 100 bonus points to move forward. So for parking, the estimated demand is 7.2 spaces, and the permitted parking range that you can provide without requiring a conditional use permit is 5 to 8. The applicant is proposing 6. For bicycle parking, 7 spaces are required. Between the in-unit spaces and the guest parking spaces, there's a total of 14. So for setbacks in the mixed-use residential zone, there's no side or front backs required. But because it's abutting the RM zone, there's a 10-foot rear setback required. For the North Hollis overlay zone, which I mentioned before from those design guidelines, a 15-foot distance between the face of the curb and a building face is required, and this project does conform to that. For open space requirements, it's 40 square feet of private open space per unit and 20 square feet of common open space per unit. This project far exceeds that. And for landscaping, there's a minimum of 10% of the site area that has to be landscaped, which basically means plants in the ground. And this exceeds that substantially as well. So for street trees and utility wires, there are currently no street trees in the front of the project. The conditions of approval include requiring street trees at every 25 feet and a 3.5-foot wide planting strip to help facilitate root growth. Usually it's just a 3-foot strip that's required. And also the undergrounding of all utilities, which is standard. So for the community benefits, we touched on this before. There's different options, a menu, if you will. There's a menu of options, and the applicant has suggested additional family-friendly units. 100% of the units are proposed to be family-friendly and contributing to the small business fund. And both Planning Commission and City Council have been supportive of that. And this slide is just explaining how the points are calculated for that. So required findings for this project requires findings for a conditional use permit, for development bonus, to go over that FAR like I talked about, required findings for the demolition of residential units, and also design review for the new structures. So the proposed use is consistent with the general plan. This is a conditional use permit finding. The characteristics and design of the proposed use are compatible with the neighborhood, and the proposed use is compatible with utilities and emergency response systems in the area. The proposed use contributes to the general well-being of the community, and it also complies with the planning regulations. For development bonus findings for the mixed-use residential district, the proposed project will provide community benefits, as we talked about, the family-friendly design and contributing to the citywide fund. And the proposed community benefits are significant and clearly beyond what would otherwise be required. The proposed community benefits for the project are acceptable and appropriate in this case, and will provide tangible benefits of additional housing, family-friendly units that would add to the diversity of the housing stock for the city of Emeryville. So for the demolition of residential units, the findings are as follows. The applicant will provide at least the same number of dwelling units as the demolished structure, which is true. The replacement structures would feature design quality that is high or is higher than the structures to be demolished and is compatible with the character of the neighborhood. So by providing larger family-friendly units that exceed the landscaping, open space, and bicycle parking standards, the replacement structures feature design quality that is higher than existing structures. And the elimination of the residential structure would not be materially detrimental, to the housing needs or the public interest of the affected neighborhood and city. And the project is providing new homeownership opportunities, larger family-friendly units. So for design review, the design of the project is consistent with the general plan. The design of the project conforms to the Emeryville design guidelines. And the project is of a high design quality that is compatible with and will not adversely affect the surrounding area. So the project requires approval from City Council upon a recommendation from Planning Commission because it involves the demolition of residential units. So tonight staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend approval to the City Council subject to the conditions of approval for a tentative City Council meeting on November 11th. The applicant is here if you have any questions, and I'm also available for questions. And there's also a materials board that I conveniently hid out of your view. It's also very loud. So this is the same materials board that was here last time, but just wanted to make sure that you know it's here again for you if you need it.
Thank you, Navar.
Yeah.
Any questions for Navar?
Yeah, I got a question.
Okay.
Navar, could you go back to the slide about parking?
Yeah. Thank you, Charlie. We have just a couple slides here.
One where you gave the number of spaces
Yes.
required and the number provided.
Yes.
Whatever.
Oh, did you want the textual one or the image?
I
I thought this was what you were asking.
textual
Text.
text. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know where that is now. Let's go forward. We're getting close.
Ish.
Sorry. There we go.
So Okay, so the estimated demand 7.2, but only 6 are required.
A minimum of 5.
Minimum 5, I see. Permitted.
Yeah.
5 is 8. Okay.
Would you like me to walk through that?
No, I
Okay.
just was I finally understanding what you have here. And then my next question is, and I'm not sure if I'm even allowed to ask this, but is there the small business fund? Is that what it is?
Yes, correct.
That won them 50 points. How does that work? Is there a dollar amount that's involved here, or what is it?
Yeah, it's a percentage of the evaluation of the project. So I believe it's 1%.
Yeah, it's,
Pop quizzed us.
yeah, what is it? It's
think I
1%
have
of construction valuation for each 10 points, I believe.
Right, yeah.
Is that right? Yeah, so for 50 points, it would be 5% of construction valuation. Their estimated construction valuation is $2.5 million, so that equals $125,000, I believe.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So, Navarre, I was wondering if you can educate me on how the funds are spent for that small business fund.
I will defer to Charlie on that.
We've never actually collected any money in this category before. We do have a fund called the Economic Development Fund, and this is a fund that comes from the tax increments that we used to get from the former redevelopment agency, the so-called boomerang funds. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's the property tax that the city gets that used to go to the redevelopment agency. So 5% of the city's boomerang funds go into this fund called the Economic Development Fund, which we use for things like our facade improvement grant program and other assistance to businesses. So our thought was simply to deposit this money into that fund.
Got it. Okay. I have one other question. In the conditions of approval, it talks about tenant relocation assistance, and I was wondering if that's actually applicable to this project. Are there tenants in the existing space?
Our understanding is that there are not, and we put that in there as an insurance policy in case.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Does the applicant wish to make any further presentation after this thorough presentation that was made? Are there any questions for the applicant?
Oh, I have one more question.
Yeah, go right ahead.
About the public art program, that's another thing that comes from the conditions of approval. I was wondering if the art that is required to be put on site goes through the public art or the art commission.
It's not required to be on site. They can contribute to the fund or have it
okay.
on site.
Right, and the short answer is no.
Okay.
The city does not pass judgment on the art that a private developer proposes to install. They simply have to show a contract to our public art coordinator to verify that the contract amount is equal to the dollar amount that is required. It's 1% of construction valuation. And I believe they have to confirm that it is a bona fide artist. And there are certain criteria for that the person has had shows or has an actual studio or something like that. Other than that, there's no blessing of the artwork by the city.
Okay. It says on here that that the housing Department Public Arts Project Coordinator to verify applicants' installation of the on-site public art.
That's right.
So,
Well, if they opt to do it on site.
okay,
If
that makes sense.
they can opt to just pay that money into the public art fund.
Do we know what option they're choosing for this project?
We've never had talks about placing art on site. It was my understanding from the applicant, the intent was always to pay directly to the fund.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I think I would appreciate it if we could get a little bit more detail about the tree protection plan, since that redwood tree has been a really big concern, and there's a big root protection area there.
guess I'd like to know a little bit more about what you'd like to know about so I can best answer.
The process of how it's going to, how is the tree going to be protected?
Sure.
Who's going to be watching where? Who's in charge?
So without looking directly at the conditions of approval and reading them directly to you, the basic idea is that the city has a consulting arborist who you've met, who's presented here before on this case and probably other ones. And they helped draft up the conditions of approval to make sure that they felt that they were comprehensive enough. So that was step one. Before any demolition occurs, there's a requirement that the applicant and the city arborist and the chief of building official have to meet to make sure that everybody's expectations are the same, that they're all on the same table, and to develop the tree protection plan. That tree protection plan needs to be developed by an arborist that the applicant hires and then reviewed and approved by the community development department and the city arborist. So that will then help guide things moving forward. When does the arborist need to be on site? At what points are critical? When do things need to be reviewed? And it includes things such as, I believe it's a monthly report that the applicant's arborist needs to prepare to submit to the city consulting arborist to make sure that everything's proceeding as is appropriate. So there also has to be a meeting before building plans are approved again, so before demolition and then again before construction. So that's the brief overview for you.
Maybe I could add a few other details. At the arborist's suggestion, the demolition, which is the site currently is covered almost entirely with concrete. The removal of that concrete, at least in the root protection zone, would be done by hand. I mean, using minimal, no heavy equipment, probably jackhammering, but then just removed with shovels or whatever, so that you wouldn't have heavy equipment sitting on the tree roots, because they don't know where the roots are, and they won't know where they are until they get that concrete up. So the consulting arborist would, the city arborist would oversee that removal of the existing concrete. And then when they figure out exactly where the roots are, the final design of the foundation of that unit and possibly the unit next to it would be done, and that would be approved by the chief building official and the city arborist.
Great, thank you.
Also, I should note that for liability reasons, we don't want the city arborist to be touching any of the roots or the trees. The applicant's arborist would need to do that. If any roots need to be cut or if any overhead branches need to be cut, that would be done by the applicant's arborist under the supervision of the city arborist.
Okay, thank you.
And by the way, we had several rather lengthy meetings in the development of this condition, these conditions related to the trees, and those meetings included, as I think Navar said, our city arborist as well as the city attorney, myself, Navar, the chief building official, representatives from Public Works. So we think we have it pretty well covered. At least we hope we do.
I hope so. I hope so too. Thank you. Okay, well, is there any discussion before we have a motion on this?
Wait, it needs to be.
You need to have a public hearing.
All right, we'll have a public hearing. I'm opening the public hearing. If there's anyone that wants to make a comment on this, please come up. Seeing no one from the public rushing to the stand here, I will close the public hearing. Now, is there any further discussion before we have a motion? Anyone care to make a motion?
I move that we approve as recommended by staff.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. Get the roll call.
Moved by Commissioner Banta and seconded by Vice Chair Barrera. You ready for a motion? I mean, a roll call? All right. Commissioner Banta?
Aye.
Commissioner Guerrero?
Aye.
Commissioner Kang?
Aye.
Commissioner Keller?
Aye.
Vice Chair Barrera?
Aye.
Chair Donaldson?
Aye.
6 ayes. The motion is approved. We will forward your recommendation for approval of this project to the City Council, which is scheduled to hear it, I believe, on
November 11th.
7th. Is that correct?
Thought you had November 11th.
Yes, November was in the,
The first meeting of November. I believe that's the 7th.
yes.
Whatever. Okay, thank you. I am going to, we're going to have a 5-minute break to allow the next applicant to set up so that we, yeah.
Would you like that break? Do you need that break?
No, really, it won't take long at all.
Okay, we'll take a 2-minute break.
2 minutes.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. This is the first study session for a new project at 5850 Shell Mound Way. This is very preliminary in nature, unlike few other study sessions where we have a lot more details. And the reason mainly is that there is one fundamental issue that the applicant needs to get your direction in before they invest further into this project. And I will walk you through that. But that is basically the reason why a lot of it's so preliminary. So this is a view of the building site. It's at the corner of Shell Mound Way and Shell Mound Christie Avenue. Shell Mound Street runs right along here. There's an existing 61,000 square foot building, and it's in about nearly a 1.5 acre site. And the building, the existing building looks like this, was built in 1979, 1980 as an office building and has been used continuously as office since then. Here is a parcel map that I would like to direct your attention to. It's a slight detail, but it's important enough to warrant a couple of slides here. So the blue is the project parcel, and the one in brown is the adjacent parcel that belongs to Public Market and is owned by City Center Realty. And if you see in this close-up here, the Public Market parcel kind of creeps into here. So, and they have proposed a driveway that will cross through property which is not theirs. So it's not, I mean, there are a number of solutions to this. There's a lot line adjustment that can be done. That would essentially mean the applicant buys a portion of the property from the City Center Realty. Alternatively, the simplest method would be that the ownership provides an access easement to this applicant. But these are details that can be worked out going down, but they will need to be worked out, and which is the reason why I want to point that out for everybody's benefit at this time. So this is the ground floor site plan, and so on the ground floor you have, it's a 259, the proposal is 259 residential units with 10,000 square foot of commercial space along Shell Mound Way. The residential amenities and office for the rental building will occur at this corner. The remainder of the site on the ground level is occupied by parking. A portion of the parking will be in parking lifts. The entrances to the building occur along here on Shell Mound Way as well as along Christie Avenue. The second floor is your typical podium building, double-loaded corridors. There's a courtyard, about 17,000 square feet, and a swimming pool. And there's a mix of 3 to 1 bedroom units as well as studios. The building reaches a height of 86.5 feet, and there are some typical flow plans that they have shown at this time. The above flows from 3 to 8 follow pretty much the pattern of the second floor plan that I showed you. So this is the building rendering. This provides a few additional details. It's showing a plaza area at this corner, as well as the roof deck. A small portion of the roof is being used for deck purposes. If you note the Christie Avenue, a lot of the frontage will be occupied by parking, and it's not altogether clear how they are going to be screening this. But I just wanted to point out that that the parking would be occurring here directly, and basically that the Christie Avenue frontage would not be active. This is sort of the rendering in context. Of course, we have a building going up under construction right now, but this is otherwise the building massing in the area. So coming to the general plan, this project will require a general plan amendment. Not only this project, but any project on the site will require a general plan amendment. And the reason for this is that in our general plan, if you notice, Shell Mound Way has a new location. It is about 250 feet north of its existing configuration, which is this one right here. And the background for this relocation is the following. If it doesn't want to, okay. Is that back in July 2007, almost 10 years ago, the city hired Kimberly Horn and Farron Pierce to study overall impact of traffic in 4 big developments, which were at that time called the Big Four. These Big Four included the Marketplace project, the Emery Station West project, Site B, and Gateway Site. The first 2 projects are under construction. Site B, which is owned by city, is at the moment we don't have any applications for either of the 2 other sites. And the Kimberly Horn scope included an analysis of moving Shell Mound Way approximately 250 north. And this slide kind of was prepared for when we presented the Big Four traffic study. It shows with greater detail where the Shell Mound Way is existing, and the proposal was to move it north. What Kimberly Horn gave us the study about was that it creates more queuing distance on Christie Avenue at Powell. It creates more queuing distance on Shell Mound Street northbound. It also creates a larger potential development site north of Powell. So if you see this, the existing site here, we have 2 buildings, Lazy Boy here and an existing office building. And if this Shell Mound were to be relocated northwards, then it would create a larger building site. So that was one of the reasons why this was analyzed and later incorporated. In addition to that, it also aligns the driveway of the Hyatt House, at that time it was called Woodfin, here. So the driveway of Woodfin is right here. So this is how it would be aligning. Right now, if you're coming along Shell Mound Way, you would have to make a left in order to go to the hotel. However, this was not recommended by Kimberly Horn because the consultant felt that the increases in queue capacity were marginal, given the costs of actual relocation. Then I'm not sure why this gets... Sorry about that. So this issue about the relocation was discussed during the general plan update process that was happening at the same time. And the revised location of the Shell Mound Way was included to allow for simplified access to the gateway parcel and to create a larger development parcel between Shell Mound Way and Powell Street. Staff can support the general plan amendment, that is to relocate the Shell Mound Way so that it remains at its existing configuration for the following reasons. One is the marginal traffic benefit and the high cost of relocation, the reduced likelihood of creating a larger development parcel given the demise of redevelopment, the added cost of relocation of underground utilities and the need to provide access to Lazy Boy, and the office building at the corner of Shellmount Way and Shellmount Street. Both these properties at this point have access of the current configuration of Shellmount Way. In terms of moving on to project's compliance with planning and zoning regulations, it is in the MUR district, and it is and it's also under the transit hub overlay zone. The use classification of multiple unit residential as well office and retail, they're both allowed by right. In terms of residential density, the base density in this area is 85 units per acre, which can be increased to 170 units per acre with bonus. They are proposing a density of 170 units per acre, so they need to revise that so that it is reduced to 170. So they would need to reduce the unit count from 259 to 254, and that will require 100 bonus points by doing that. In FAR, the base FAR is 3, bonus is 6. They're proposing 5.2. It will require 73 bonus points for FAR. Regarding height, the base height is 85. The bonus height can be 100 and over. They are proposing a little over the base height of 86.5 feet, and so about 6 points will be required for the project, for the height, sorry. In total, because of the density, they will be needing to obtain 100 bonus points. So in terms of bonus points, as required by a regulation, they have to obtain half of them through affordable housing. So that calculates to 43 units of affordable units, 10 at very low income, 15 at low income, and 18 at moderate incomes. In terms of how they are going to obtain the additional 50 points, they have not yet identified that, and we will be asking you this question as to if you have any suggestions for how they might obtain the remaining 50 bonus points. Moving on to parking. The requirement is let's do the unit mix and family-friendly design first. So as you know, the requirement is 50% of the units need to be 2 and 3 bedroom units, of which 15% of the total need to be 3-bedroom units. And they are allowed only 10% studios. The unit mix needs to be revised so that they bring the 3-bedroom count to 15%. At this point, it is a little under that. There was some confusion. They thought it was 15% of the 50%, but it's actually 15% of 100. So I think they have no problems complying with this as we move forward. In terms of family-friendly floor plans, that's too early in the process to talk about it. Moving on to parking, I apologize for the stickiness of my PowerPoint. So the site, as I mentioned, is in the transit hub overlay, which reduces parking further by 50%. So that calculates the requirement to 112 to 185 spaces. They're providing more than what the maximum that they are allowed. That is permitted by our regulations. However, you would need a conditional use permit for that, and they would need to demonstrate to the commission that the additional parking is required to meet their anticipated demand, and that the provision of more parking will not adversely affect transit, bicycle, or pedestrian access to the site, and it will not result in an overdependence on cars. So essentially, this is what they have to demonstrate to you, and in turn, you have to accept and make these findings. They have not gotten into the bicycle parking and figuring out the details of location, but they will be required to provide 6 short-term and 254 long-term spaces in accordance with our regulations. This project was reviewed by DCC, and after robust conversation on the general plan amendment, the following comments were made. Christie Avenue frontage needed active uses, and that the parking needed to be screened from the street. One option that was suggested is to use that corridor for art gallery, something similar to what Avenue 64 has, but there are other ways that that frontage can be activated. But that was just one suggestion that was given. The plaza area at the corner of Christie and Shellmount Way was felt that it would be underutilized given the traffic volumes on both the streets. And what was suggested is a corner to be held with a building form that followed the angular shape of the parcel. The east side of the building facing Shellmount Street, which is a vital commercial and pedestrian corridor in our city, and a lot of effort by both the city center and city being made at the moment in order to make that a vital corridor, and this is being treated as back of the building. It is true that Marketplace does have a small building at the corner of Shellmount Way and Shellmount Street, but that is a one-story building, so the rest of the building behind this will show up as a blank wall. So that needs to be addressed in some form. As staff, we felt this building has a huge roof area and it is being underutilized, and it's a good opportunity to at least have a green roof or other recreational uses, and at the very minimum, solar panels would be desired here. So in terms of the issues in front of you, the first one is the general plan amendment. Is the commission in support of a general plan amendment that will change the location of Shellmount Way in the general plan such that it aligns with its existing configuration? Mix of uses, is this commission satisfied with the proposed mix of uses? It's overwhelmingly rental residential units, about 100,000 square feet, and 10,000 square feet of commercial space. Bonus points, does the commission have any suggestions as to the type of community benefits that the project should provide at this site to obtain the 50 bonus points? And of course, any other design or other issues that the commission may want to comment on at this preliminary design concept stage. That concludes my presentation. Obviously, the applicant is here with a presentation as well. I'm happy to answer questions at this time or later.
We should also note that we have a comment letter from John Schurman that I believe you should all have a copy of, and he provides a diagram of some of his suggestions for the project.
Why don't we wait to hear their presentation then?
Does anyone else have a question for Nuru? No? Okay. Then if the applicant would like to give a presentation, that would be great.
Good evening, commissioners, chair and vice chair. My name is Bill Schrader. I own a development company here in the East Bay called the Austin Group. Tonight I have with me David Johnson from Johnson Lyman Architects. Dave and I have been doing a number of these around the East Bay, podium, 6 to 8 story buildings is kind of what we do, generally mixed use projects, similar to what we're proposing tonight. We would normally spend kind of more time and give you more kind of oomph in the presentation and drawings and so on, but we really needed to have an understanding from you all about the massing primarily. So what we'd really like you to do is, not pay so much attention to the architecture. Dave just kind of filled some of that in for now so we can get a sense from you whether this 8-story building is the kind of thing you'd like to see on this site, which we believe is what's allowed and possibly even encouraged, but we'd love to get your input. So I'd like to give you a little bit of background. The property owner, Jerry Klein, is with me tonight. He's in the back. If we end up having any questions regarding the ownership, Jerry's here. His attorney, Kevin Fink, is here as well. Jerry built a business here in Emeryville over the last 25 years or so called Innovative in this building. He sold that company about 3 or 4 years ago. And in the process, that company, which was one of his competitors, has been in the process, they leased the building back from him. That lease expires at the end of 2018. And they're in the process of moving all of the employees out of Emeryville, scattered across the country, and actually a few employees I think are moving to Ireland. So he's here if there's any questions of him. He does have a relationship with the folks next door at the Market project. So this issue about the driveway, we believe we have an easement, but we'll have to work it out with them. Obviously, it's a very large site at 1.5 acres. We don't have to have that little piece to get in, but we happen to think right now that's probably the best circulation pattern on the ground floor for parking and getting people in and out, trucks and deliveries and those kinds of things. With that, I think it would probably be best, Dave, if maybe you walk them through just briefly what we've done so far, and then maybe we can get some input and maybe some questions, because we really, I mean, we did some of this analog stuff. Our experience in doing this sometimes is if you bring some drawings, people can come and touch and feel it rather than doing it all electronic. Certainly the next few times we come in before you with some more input, we'll probably do it mostly electronic so that the public can see better than kind of the back of the boards. So with that, I will stand over to the side and let Dave do his magic. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Hi, my name is Dave Johnson with Johnson Lyman Architects. It's a pleasure to present this. As Bill said, though, our dilemma here was with the street relocation, how much should we try to design this building until we know whether the street's going to stay or move? So that was strictly why we're staying with massing models, in my opinion. I've seen all the renderings from the marketplace, and they're beautiful. All the renderings, the use of brick, the use of board form, the use of black steel, the use of some siding materials, all beautiful renderings. Very much inspirational in terms of a design approach. I tried to hint at the materials on these renderings, but our main focus is meeting all the intents of your ordinances, the heights, the density. Maru pointed out a few things. We've already adjusted all the unit counts. We're down to 252 at the latest. Our car count is down to 179 because we've paid attention to your bike requirements. I didn't realize that every unit needed a bike. In Berkeley, Berkeley doesn't even have a biking ordinance, as you probably all know. So we were surprised to see that. So we lost some cars because of that. The other issues, the density, the FAR, we're under the FAR, but with bonus points. So all these drawings you had tonight were really just to get us past the hurdle of, is the street going to stay or move? And looking at all the pedestrian amenities, all the pedestrian interaction with the street, we obviously know that's extremely important, and we can't wait to attack that in the next go-round. But these drawings are strictly to show the general overall intent. And I do want to point out that on the backside, on the side-facing Shell Mound Street, this rendering here is one of the beautiful renderings that for the marketplace. Our building would be obviously on that location. Now, Maru said a blank wall. Our ground level would be basically on the property line, so we couldn't have any openings. And actually, I think they're pretty close to the property line on their side. So we'd be butting up to that building. Above that, we'd have apartments with windows. So it's not going to be a blank wall going up 85 feet. And I don't know if that's what you meant when you said a blank wall. But it's all going to be units facing out in every direction, actually. So I just want to make that clear that it wasn't a blank wall. That wouldn't be too appealing. So really, again, all these aerials you saw was showing context and everything. And I want to keep it brief, but like I said, we can't wait to come back with all the pretty pictures.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant? Or are you?
I want to lob one more in.
Okay.
We want to thank Maru and Charlie. We had several meetings with them, and Dave and I are rookies in town, and kind of every community we do business with, it's always a little different, the way things go and so on. And they've been very helpful in kind of bringing us up the learning curve so far. But as Dave said, this is just kind of preliminary work study session kind of stuff, and we'd love to get your input on kind of massing and so on. Thank you.
One more thing to add, just quickly. The family-friendly units, that was really shocking. I have been to a lot of cities and never seen something so specific as what's required in all these units. So that's obviously where we have to start, getting those units to staff satisfaction before we can go any further with design. So we tried to get there, and there are still problems, we understand, but we're working towards that goal.
All right. Thank Thank you. You have questions?
Do. Mr. Johnson, just want to focus on the parking issue for a second on the plan here, page A1 specifically. The parking, the handicap parking spaces that are depicted, it shows 4 of them. Are there actually like 4 that you got planned for handicap parking specifically, or is it just a visual representation, this is where they're going to be?
No, I think the closer to our residential lobby was what I was trying to do.
Okay.
I'm sorry, this is
Okay.
that was my goal.
Okay. Do you know how many handicap spaces would be available at this point of your rendering?
Those are those 4 handicap stalls for the...
Just those 4?
Right.
Okay, gotcha. Do you know if they're going to be residential and commercial, those 4, or is it just for residential?
Well, that's a good question. It has to be shared, but for the amount of cars we have, that's what we're showing. Now, they would have to be shared, I guess, to some extent with the residential also, because that is a common garage, except for the lifts. Obviously, the lifts are going to be residential only, and they're 3-car lifts. So we have about an 18-foot clear distance in this garage to get a 3-car lift. And the lifts go up and sideways, so you push a button and your car moves around until it gets to the opening. And, it's a very efficient system and actually very, also very affordable compared to going underground.
Gotcha. And
Chair Donaldson, excuse me, if I could just comment on the handicap parking issue. That is governed by the building code. So it's not really part of the Planning Commission's consideration or part of the planning regulations. The building division will determine how many handicap spaces are required and where they're required to be located. I know they have to have an accessible path of travel to each space, and I believe the number is a proportion of the total number of spaces. So they'll figure that out as part of the building
so
review.
that the number of handicap spaces this requires is undetermined for the moment.
I think that's a fair comment.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can check with the chief building official and find out what the number is, but it's not, you won't find it in the planning regulations.
Okay. For the parking itself, could you specify exactly which set of spaces are intended exclusively for residents versus commercial or mixed?
Sure.
Uh-oh, here comes help.
The button, no.
Probably a dead battery.
There you go. Thanks. Nope. Green light's on.
Yeah, that's good.
Is that good? Okay, in the rear, the stalls I show with these V's in them, those are all the 3-car lifts, which greatly multiply the amount of cars. I think in this bank we have 52, in this bank we have 86. So that's strictly for the residential.
Okay.
The rest, these are all ground level stalls and would be for the retail.
They're all for retail.
Yeah, and I want to point out that, again, talking with Maru, we've allowed a great amount of space here for bikes and also for loading areas. That's something else that Maru mentioned, that we need to provide some loading areas for the retail. And we've designated that area, lowering our car count, but meeting more what the city's intent is.
Stay right there, Mr. Jones. Could you actually point out where in the space you're going to make room for the bike racks and bike parking?
Okay, we show an area here. How many bikes did I get? Over 100 bikes in this area. We need 260. And I think I had some areas. We wanted to maybe have a bike shop with the bike storage. That hasn't been resolved, obviously, but that's a detail that we know is very important.
Gotcha. Okay. That's all my questions for now. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yes. Are the parking spaces that are on the right-hand side of the building part of the marketplace property?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's our problem, yeah.
And that elevation is the one that you said that the ground floor is going to have the solid wall?
Yes.
Correct?
At the ground level.
At the ground level.
Our building is right here, and we can't have any openings on a property line.
But if you set the wall back, you would be able to have openings, right?
At the upper level, we are separating it back for the apartments, so that we've separated it back 5 feet for the windows. Yes.
Would you be able to do that with the ground level as well?
Well, I was trying to point out that with this rendering, a lot of it's buffered by this new building that's planned for the marketplace.
Could you
We
pick
can
that up,
certainly
please?
articulate it Oh, I'm sorry.
So we can see. Thank you.
This building's going to butt up next to the back of our building at this front. It's like 3,000 feet, I believe, approximately, the pad next to our building here. But you are correct, they own all
Sorry,
of
can you
that.
use the microphone?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Testing, there we go. They own all the parking behind it. And so behind our building, there's a double row parking with an aisle down the middle. Now, maybe it's possible we could work something out with them. Maybe we buy that land from them. We can add it to ours. We're going to have a conversation with them, but we wanted to come to you first and get your input, and then we can start talking to them.
Can you point out where that building is in relation to?
I was just going to show this, but I can look at this for a second. That shows parcel F.
Okay, we need to do this so that everybody can see, right?
Maybe you can put it on the
Yeah.
overhead, please.
Dave, you can show
Yeah,
it
the
here.
overhead.
Show it here.
Okay, okay.
Anybody see
Um,
that?
This is the overall master plan for the marketplace. But
Could you put that on the overhead so that people that are watching this can see? Thank you.
Ah,
Magic.
look at that.
Let's twiddle it out.
that's like this. So that building is basically in this location. Now, we do have this back portion. I can't argue that, so we could certainly articulate that. I just wanted to point out that a majority of that wall, at least half of it, is going to be taken up by that retail building, which is on the property line as far as I can tell from that drawing. Maybe there might be a setback of 5 feet.
Okay.
I think they have parking behind it to the north for that building. I think that's the goal.
The answer to your question is yes, we could move the wall back, but you'd lose some parking spaces and have to reconfigure the drive aisle and all that. It might be better if we try to find a way to articulate that wall, leave it on the property line, but we're open to either. Or maybe we do a little of both. Maybe someone comes out and goes back in, and we do some artwork in there. We can come up with something I think that you'll like and it'll be creative.
And the area behind that solid wall is parking, correct?
It's where those
Here?
It's where the bikes are. We took 8 parking spaces out there and put 150 bikes in there.
Okay, got it. That's my only question for now.
Any other questions?
Yeah, have you had a chance to think about materials for your elevations?
As I mentioned, we're very schematic here, but I was really impressed with the material usage with the brick, the black steel, the board form. I saw indications of that. Siding materials, very warm materials and earth tones. I would gladly listen to any other recommendations in terms of materials that you folks like. That's obviously why we're here.
So it would be incorrect of me to assume that you were thinking of stucco for this.
Well, okay, stucco's a bad word, I know. But, the only places I show it are the beige materials. But again, if that's forbidden in Emeryville, then we can find something else. But it wasn't a lot of plaster.
You have an interior courtyard.
Yes.
And then it's basically surrounded by apartments that overlook it.
Correct.
And that I think the height from the courtyard to the roof line is about 70 feet, something like that.
Correct. The podium's up 18 feet or so.
And you have an 86-foot high
Yes.
building, so it's a little bit less than 70 feet. So have you had an opportunity at all to conduct any kind of shadow studies for that courtyard?
We certainly can. And yeah, that's obviously, as the sun comes around in the afternoon, it's going to be shadowing that area.
Okay, good, thank you.
Can you go into some more ideas of what you have for the space there on the roof? It looks like you used a small portion of the corner there.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in learning some of your thoughts on how to occupy that space and activate it.
Do you want to address that?
Sure,
before we
sure.
go into-
We've done all kinds of rooftop decks and so on, and we would do that here as well. We put solar in every project these days, so our plan would be we'd put enough solar in here that we'd offset all of our utilities for the building, not necessarily for the tenants, but for the common utilities. We did a project of only about 80 units, I think, and we did a 20 kilowatt system. I think it was about 30 panels. So this would be 3 times that size, probably, something like that, maybe a 50 kilowatt system. But yeah, we would plan on doing that up here. We can also expand. As Maru said, this roof is so large, we can do a lot of things with it. We haven't gotten to the point where we've even hired a landscape architect to help us yet, but we would, and we'd come back to you with a lot of detail, and we can zoom in and you can kind of see the things that we would likely do up there. What we've done in the past, when we're this close to the bay, is it's usually windy, so you need some screen walls. A lot of times we put fire pits on the roof. Depends upon how crazy the fire marshal sometimes doesn't like that. But we've got a lot of things that we've done. We do overhead heaters and couches. We kind of try to make this another room to the building. That's the way we kind of think about it.
Thank you. In terms of the dimensions of the pool in the interior courtyard, is that still something that's to be decided?
It's purely schematic, yeah.
Okay.
How big?
I like the rectangular shape. I also echo my colleagues in terms of the shadow in the courtyard. It looks as though that the sun may only peek in there for an hour of the day. But very interested in learning more about the shadows. And in terms of exterior bike parking, can you go into more details about that?
Exterior. Well, bike lockers, you mean, or bike?
Mm-hmm.
Bike. We're going to have to obviously plan for that. That hasn't been thought through. In terms
Okay.
of where that might go. And I'm sure, obviously, looking through your guidelines are very specific, so we can scour those and get that right.
Thank you.
No questions. I don't have any questions at this point either. This is a study session, but if there's someone from the public that wishes to comment or ask a question, please come and...
Do you have a couple questions? Sure.
Yeah.
My name's Rod Lawler. I live in 6363 Christie, and I work in 5850 Shellmount. You've talked about parking. I think that's definitely a concern, and also the traffic. Living in this area for the last 5 years, I've been shocked at how much traffic there is coming around that corner. And it is not a street that I go out and walk on. I avoid the street, and just trying to move in your car is a problem, and I would have hoped that we could have addressed this issue with any new development that was done in this area. It's really complex. I assume that you're all aware of that street and the traffic there, and I don't need to really describe that. So when you're coming north on Christie, you're coming from a 2-lane to 1-lane and merging into Christie right at the area where we're proposing that you enter into the building on the one side off of Christie. And then also when you're coming around the corner from Shellmount Street to Shellmount Way, people are going to want to be in the right lane because they're in the right lane on Shellman Way, then there's right street, right lane on Christie, so that they can go right lane to the freeway. And so if the other entrance to the building is coming right off of that right lane, that's also an issue for, I think, safety, and people are coming around that corner pretty fast as long as the light was green as they approach it. So anyway, the traffic moves pretty quick around there, and there's a lot of it. So we talked about the parking. One issue is security of parking. Where I live at 6363 Christie, we have secure parking there, and it's a huge bonus. I think people really appreciate that. And so this building, where you have shared parking between commercial and tenants, you don't have the option of having that secure parking. Another issue I had was the north side of the building. I wondered what development would happen there. You've currently got a one-story building, kind of a two-story building because it's a storage type of building. But that building, I assume, is not going to be there for a long time. So what happens to that north facade that's almost at the property line when that next building wants, for any further development that's done there? And then this is a minor thing. Well, as a pedestrian, the building is right up to the edge of the sidewalk. You're next to heavy traffic. It's going to be a pretty uncomfortable space to walk along. So I'm wondering how that can be addressed. And really minor issue, the swimming pool. I wonder how a swimming pool can actually go in that space because it has to drop so far down into the, how do you get things like shipping in there? Your moving vans, they're going to have to load into a smaller vehicle to get any shipping in there or to move people, and even just UPS and that kind of thing that has to go into that space. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you sign in too so that we know who you... Anyone else wishing to make a comment? Okay. We'll open it up for discussion here and give the applicant some direction.
Yep. Oh, I mean, we know this is only the beginning phase, but I think we're all looking forward to working on this with you to just put some meat on the bones on this thing. I thank the resident for offering his comments. I thought his comments were actually pretty insightful. The parking spaces, even though we may not have jurisdiction over the handicap parking space issue, I think it'd be just for, at least for our edification, might be good once that the number is determined, just to get an idea of where they are and the number, just so that we know. Because even if we don't have a specific jurisdiction over them, that might impact our analysis of other things that could be impacted. So we'd love to get more specification as to where the bikes are going to be placed, as well as where the open space is going to be. It's just going to be. This looks like space is at a premium here from what I see. Would love to just get more at the next study session, I'd just love to get more insight as to how this is going to happen and what it's going to look like, because we do care about that a lot here in the city. I'll limit my comments to that for now.
Okay. So I will start with the building massing. I think that it's a little bit bulky, and I don't have an issue with the height as much, but I think that the massing could be addressed if the building were broken up, and possibly also step back at different levels so that you don't have such a big plane on each side, so you have a little bit more articulation. Another comment that I have is regarding the active space. Right now you have the active space on Christie and Shell Mound, and I don't think it makes sense there because that's a bit more of an auto-oriented corner. So my suggestion would be to move the activated space over to the Shell Mound street side. You have a lot more of the commercial activity going on that end. So would that be something that would be an option?
Over in here?
Somewhere around, yeah.
We don't own this land, so we can't do much here.
Right.
So you're talking about kind of...
What about the northeast corner? Mm-hmm. Would that be an option to do something like that? Okay. Yeah, I think the northeast corner would make more sense.
Or it's going to be parking.
Or the southeast corner, either one of those. But I think the intersection where it's at right now is not very pedestrian friendly. Oh, and I had one other question regarding the commercial space square footage. How did you folks come up with the 10,000 square foot number? Is that something? Yeah.
Oh, the actual square footage?
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, these mixed-use buildings, by the time you put all the back of house in, you put all the parking in, you put the lobby in, you put all the other things, it kind of falls out. I think our original plan that we shared with Charlie and Maru was 7,000, I believe, or maybe it was 7,500, and we increased it as much as we think we can and still have enough real estate to get all the other pieces in.
Mm-hmm. I guess I wonder if the space could accommodate more commercial space. I think I would appreciate you folks looking into that.
Take a look at it.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the materials, I think, or even the colors, I think I would like to see a little bit more contrast, because at this point, and I know it's preliminary, but it seems like you have a lot of the same tone in the entire building.
It's not going to look like this
Okay,
when we bring it back to you.
I don't want to be too loud, though.
But so yeah, I guess my biggest issue is the massing, and I think that can be easily addressed by breaking up the building and stepping it back at different levels.
Kind of wedding cake style.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do you mind if I go last?
Okay.
Okay, so, let's see. In terms of the parking, really interested in learning more about EV charging station capacity, and whether that would be able to be used for the car lifts. I've never seen that before, but interested in learning more about that.
There's only one company supposedly in the world that electrifies their car lifts, and that is City Lift in Oakland, which is Mike Gilmetti's company. And we just installed 3 sets of those in a project in Berkeley, and they're working great. Those are 3-level puzzle lifts. In Oakland, we're doing one that has 4-level puzzle lifts, and they all have the potential to be electrified. They have figured out how to do that.
That's great.
Because we're going to build a 75-year building, and 10 years from now, everybody's going to drive electric cars. So we're going to build something that's obsolete in 10 years. So the biggest issue, and where we might actually lean on the city for some help at some point, is PG&E hasn't kind of caught up to this idea. They don't want us to put a transformer in that's 2 or 3 times the size of what we need to accommodate future electric cars. So we've been kind of going through this a little bit with them, but your point is really, really well taken.
The capacity of the PV solar panels on the roof, really interested in learning more about that. In terms of the usage of the space, whether it be like activated with residential amenity space, I think there's plans for a park just block down, and with that space that you show there, I don't see any need to increase the space of the actual amenity piece. I think that the roof has plenty of space for PV panels. Okay. The southern corner on Shell Mound Way, where the building kind of meets the sidewalk there, it looks really small. And can you talk a bit more about the pedestrian thoroughway there?
This looks like it's a foot wide.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, again, an artistic, well, I wouldn't say artistic, but it's just a matching study. It's closer than the 10 feet that we have to step back. The building, ideally, the building is going to jog along the property line. That's the goal. But again, I didn't want to get too deep into the design until I got all your feedback. So I appreciate all these comments.
In terms of the corner, that looks like you're planning for some activation there in that corner. I too agree that that's not a corner that's pedestrian friendly, but I like the idea that you have it there, because that may be a way to start activating that corner and make it more visible that people are using it. And so what I do like about that space is that that's going to get most of the sun during the latter part of the day. And so that corner makes sense to me. I like it there. Those are all my comments. Thank you.
Okay, well, now we turn to a different chapter, and a place where you're going to find someone who doesn't totally agree with their fellow commissioners, but I have a lot of ideas for you. And I'm going to also need staff to put a couple things on the overhead when I'm ready for it. So first of all, I want to express my support for the project. I do support the project. I love the reuse of this parcel. I live at 6363. I live at the Pacific Park Plaza high-rise. I've been there for 15 years, and this has not been one of my favorite buildings that currently exists there in that parking structure, so I'm not sorry to see that go. But so far, I don't like what's being suggested here. Number one, I don't like that the plan is to work within the current property boundaries, that the current proposal is not working to integrate more with the neighborhood and the rest of the neighbors. I'm concerned that the parcel is being designed in a vacuum. That there's so much going on around in this area, and most of it is still basically unknown. The property here north is one of 3 parcels that is owned by the city and up for redevelopment. So I think we need to look more at that overall a holistic thing. And as I mentioned, I had reached out to Mark Steffens at City Center, and he said that you guys hadn't approached him about buying the parking lot parcel 2, but he doesn't know that he's actually quite interested in selling that parcel, but he is willing to entertain a conversation. So I would hope that you go there and see where that can get you. And also, I think you need to really consider, I don't think the city knows itself what they're going to do. I don't know that we've released a RFP or anything for the property north of that, but I think that's going to play a big factor. If you're going to build up to the property line, then that leaves us little to do with that property to the north. So we need to kind of integrate that a little bit more. So along the same vein, I do agree that it is not very viable, but I've always supported the city's general plan in moving Shell Mound Street to the north. I don't think that that's really viable, hearing all that we've heard and the other problems. We can't acquire that other property where Lazy Boy is to make a bigger development site. So we do have traffic issues at that section, and it's going to be bigger. So the first thing I'd like for staff to put up is a new circulation plan that I know our Councilmember Bowders has brought up to the city before, and it's something as a resident I have looked at closely, and I've actually done this, and I really support that. What we do is we create 2 one-way sections. That Shell Mound Way, that frontier building, would become a one-way street. And it would come off of Shell Mound Street, and you turn left, and it is one-way only westbound. And then it turns only left. Well, not only left, no, it turns primarily left onto a one-way section of Christie. So what we would do is eliminate the left-hand turn lane off Powell Street onto Christie, which then eliminates the problems of people turning left into the 76 station, which is where we really have a lot of issues. So myself, when I come home, I have to turn off of Powell Street, coming off the highway. I turn right onto Christie. I circle around Christie and on left onto Shell Mound, come under the bridge, and turn left onto Shell Mound Way, and then I could turn right onto Christie Avenue. So this is something that's been floated. I think we need to take a more serious look at that. And I think part of that, and I'll get into a little bit more later, is that on Shell Mound Way, what we do with that piece of property that some feel is a nice pedestrian area, some do not, is we create a right turn pocket. So on Shell Mound Way, you have all lanes turning left except one is strictly right turn. So the people turning right onto Christie do not stack up as part of the people causing the problem. So we remove all those people out of that flow of traffic and bring them. So you have the room there. I've often looked at that property and I see a really nice swath that could be a right-hand turn lane. So we would eliminate a lot of the problems, I think. So I think these are areas that we have to look at, because you have to park either off of Shell Mound Way or off of Christie. There's no other way to bring parking into your program. So again, the plan, I don't think, considers the redevelopment potential of the parcels south of Shell Mound Way and how the entire area can be much better and stronger development site. That's where the Lazy Boy is and the current tilt-up building that's left vacant for a long time. Then there's a consideration of the redevelopment of the larger site to the west, often referred to as the Gateway Project. The project there has no real relation to any other parcel in the neighborhood, so I really want to look at integrating that. I feel developing this site on its own harms the potential for better projects in all areas, all the surrounding parcels. So because we don't move Shell Mound Way, which I don't think we're going to do, if it moves forward as an independent project, then these are some of the items I need to see to make the project a project I can support. And first, I agree with all the things that the DCC had recommended. I would follow all those recommendations. Again, the right-hand turn lane off of Shell Mound Way onto Christie, I think, is a very important step in correcting the issues. The super block needs to be broken up by providing a bike and pedestrian path along the north side, as John Sherman had mentioned. So that would go from Christie to the southern end of Public Market. So you would create a pedestrian bicycle way on the north side of your building. The building garage and recycling cannot be, the building garbage and recycling cannot be staged outside the building at any time. Collection must take place in the building, and all the streets surrounding the area are way too busy to hold dumpsters for any length of time, even on the day they're picked up. We have that problem on 64th outside of Emmy and other places around town, so that's something I'm going to want to see before I could support the project. And there also needs to be one large, this was a question we were kind of asked, and I believe you need to provide one large and one small loading dock, because you need to provide for a bigger truck for transcontinental move-ins and stuff like that. Those cannot double park on those streets at any time. All sides of the building must be treated equal. There can be no front or backs, particularly relating to the east side. So however you work that out, we want to see some ideas on that. And additionally, we just need to see how you're going to address that north side of the development, taking into consideration the property site adjacent. I believe the city codes must be adhered to regarding the unit number. The number of parking spaces, 85, I think is sufficient. A number of people who are not versed in parking and transit and traffic think that you provide more parking in the garage, you're going to have less traffic, but that's not the case. You provide for more cars, you get more cars. So I want to hold you at the 85, and I'm glad to hear you even gone below the 185, so that's good. Sidewalk widths, you have to maintain and exceed the city guidelines for parking. And I walk in that area, that is one of the worst. Matter of fact, Charlie, you'll probably remember we walked the city several years ago, and the comment you made on that was you got barely enough room for one person on that sidewalk, so that definitely is an improvement we need to see. Along with the city codes of bike parking, which I'm really glad to hear, and to include parking lockers, which would be not only just for outside use like bike link, but inside the residence. I have a bike locker, and I find it very, very useful to have that. TDM measures must be followed and expanded, and whatever open spaces, looks like you're doing pretty good with that. But as fellow commissioners, I don't know the viability of your rooftop Emmys. I look right down on Emmys apartments, and I very rarely see that rooftop used. So I think if you do some PV up there and do some better interior spaces and some streetscaping, we might get more bang for your buck on that. So the other two things I want staff to put up, I'm going to hand it down some examples to my colleagues, and there'll be a copy for you guys. Give that to them. I have single copies you could put on that. For staff. The architecture style needs to be cleaner and more contemporary in my point of view. When I first saw the images on the first page of your presentation, I thought Stonefire. Looks just like Stonefire in Berkeley. Did a little looking on the website, and oh my gosh, who did Stonefire? It was you guys.
Are you serious? You saw that and you saw?
Yes, the minute I saw that building, I said, that looks just like Stonefire.
There's no brick on Stonefire, though.
Oh, and these images, it's hard to tell what the finish is, but
My architect can be defensive sometimes. Don't sweat it. It's not going to look like Stonefire.
We all can. No, and it's not Stonefire in particular. It's that vernacular. And so I think the design team just needs to work on pushing the creative boundaries. And what I'm showing here is something these are buildings that I've just shot in San Francisco. And it was just on a one-day walk. All these buildings, except one, are 8 or less stories. They're a more contemporary style. They're a cleaner style. They offer larger glass for the tenants. And I know a lot of people say that when you do stick structure, you can't really do larger windows. But Liquid Sugar Lofts in town here have done steel and...
We cannot build this in stick.
Oh, okay. So you're not...
It's too big.
Oh,
so
okay.
We're going to build it more than likely lightweight concrete and light gauge metal.
Great.
Which creates a really solid building. It's a great way to build it. They're more expensive, but we won't be able to do stick on this one.
Right. So you will be able, so you could translate into something more contemporary. And I don't want to disagree with Commissioner Barrera, but I'm tired of articulation being used as architectural features. And it seems every building, and I'm talking in Oakland, in Berkeley, in Emeryville, this is kind of what we do. And I'm ready for something cleaner, something more contemporary, something fresh. And so you might have to walk a walk of where you kind of cross both lines, or you maybe sell someone else on a style. I just want you to look at that. And that's just my opinion. And what I like is that you guys brought this project to us so early, that it is in its infancy and you don't have a lot of details, because this way we can provide you with things that we would like to see. So in a nutshell, as if that's not long enough, that's kind of what we're looking to see. Thank you for your work.
Yeah, go right ahead.
I think that traffic is going to be one of the big issues here, and I don't think that it makes sense at this point to move Shell Mound Way, so I would think that I would support the general plan amendment to have the road stay where it is, primarily because of access to the parcels to the south. And I think that clearly there's going to need to be a traffic study associated with this project no matter what happens. So I think a lot of those issues will be flushed out a lot more, and we'll be looking at different circulation alternatives. And something will need to be done as that area gets more dense, because it is a traffic nightmare at this point. So I'm looking forward to seeing some creative ideas on how to deal with that. Personally, I do like the idea of the building having some variation and at least stepping back, and partly because of this, both because of the way it looks from the outside, but I'm very much concerned about the usability of that courtyard on the inside. Being sunk down 6 stories seems like it's not going to get much use and it's not going to get much light, so I would really look forward to seeing shadow studies on that. I think that your comments that you do incorporate the green features are really encouraging, both on the roof, in the parking, with the EV stations, that kind of thing. I like to see that. The activation on the sidewalk, with wider sidewalks, with something other than dead space in front of it. Even though that is a really nasty pedestrian area, there's a lot of pedestrian activity there. Every time I'm sitting at the intersection waiting to go across over the bridge to where I live, there's pedestrians going from Trader Joe's and all that. There's a lot of people that do walk around there, so making the sidewalks and the building facade on the ground floor attractive and interactive in some way is good. I'm not quite sure whether I agree about the plaza giving some breathing space, or whether I think that the building should be more prominent there, but I do like Commissioner Barrera's idea that activated space could serve people better on the southeast corner, whether it's integrated with some kind, I don't know how it'll integrate with the plans for that other building, but Shell Mound Street we're trying to make that a major pedestrian connection between the Bay Street area, Site B, and the marketplace, so that we're really trying to do anything that we can do to encourage pleasant pedestrian spaces along that area. So with 250 plus or minus units, we're looking at adding, I don't know, 500, 750 people, and we're trying to maintain or get to 3 acres of usable public park space per 1,000 people in Emeryville. So I know that there is a park in lieu fee that gets addressed, but any kind of recreational space that you can incorporate into the project would help mitigate the increased density. So if there are ways to use that roof to create some spaces with, wind buffers and with solar exposure and that, I would like to see usable space in whatever open areas can be addressed on the building. And that's basically my comments for now.
So, thank you, Chairman. I just want to start off by saying I support keeping the road where it is, and I support the density of your project as well. And your project was very interesting to me. It really made me think a lot about development in Emeryville and our role as planning commissioners in helping to manage that development. And I think your project is important for a number of reasons. It's the time and context in which it's occurring in Emeryville's evolution as a city, and its location as a gateway to all the improvements for the Emeryville Public Market District. And the opportunity represents for you and for the city to bring to life a large-scale contribution to the city's identity. So I have, if you can bear with me, because your project was so sort of triggered all these thoughts I had, I wanted to share them with my fellow commissioners. When I first came here in the early 80s, Emeryville on this side of the freeway was a city mostly of empty industrial buildings. And all that industry and the jobs have since relocated to less expensive environments. Although at that time you could still smell the distinct fragrance of the tanning factory over by the tracks. And along Hollis Street there were more trucks than cars, and of course no pedestrians anywhere. So now you see gaggles of tech workers crowded onto the sidewalks searching for cappuccinos, and fathers pushing prams on their way to the park with their little children. And of course, there's no place left to park. So almost all the industrial sites have been converted to office space, housing, or retail, and Emeryville's graduated into a vibrant, mixed-use, bicycle-friendly metropolis of services, housing, parks, greenways, and companies of all types, with thousands and thousands of jobs and thousands of places people call home, as well as long-established and now growing arts culture. What's interesting is that this didn't just inevitably happen. It was the result of focused intention by city councils and planning commissions over the decades that supported the transformation of a shell of a city into a modern urban center that works for all its stakeholders. Almost all the eligible sites in Emeryville have been converted to their higher and better uses, and your project is part of the last chapters of redevelopment in the city, and the context for that redevelopment and the stakes and the expectations for it have evolved along with the economy. So you're coming into a mature urban environment, one that will serve and support the success of your project. And I'm sure the price you're paying for the property reflects that. So I think it's important for the community to understand that you, as the applicant and the developer, are nonetheless taking on considerable risk in this development. If your project were opening tomorrow, you'd probably rent up completely within a couple of months, but it's not opening tomorrow. So you're facing risks of increased construction costs, increased competition from other projects coming online in the meantime, unfavorable changes in the marketplace, both for rental rates and cost of money, and potential problems that may occur during construction, all of which could combine to threaten the economic health of your investment. As planning commissioners, we're not going to make decisions based on any of these economic factors, which are neither in our control nor appropriate criteria for rendering our approval or denial. But we are nonetheless aware of the fact that you alone are assuming all the financial risk for this project. It's not an insignificant fact, because your project will bring to the city certain benefits that accrue to the body politic and to our individual citizens, both those living here now and who will be here in the future, part of whom will be in your project. You'll be building high-density housing, which by definition contributes environmental conservation in non-urban areas, which contributes to transportation and infrastructure efficiencies, which brings the city another built-in consumer constituency to support existing retail enterprises, such as grocery stores, shops, restaurants. You'll be adding to the housing stock, which according to our cherished law of supply and demand, is supposed to result in more affordable residential options. Someday, we hope, although you're probably hoping not too soon. In any case, you're producing part of the solution for the challenges that face our society. You're creating homes for people potentially close to their work, whether it's here or in the greater metropolitan area, reduces commuting times. But perhaps most importantly, from our point of view as planning commissioners, you'll be building a physical landmark that will add to our urban definition, to our arrangement of built structures that constitute an involuntary art museum of large-scale sculptures that passersby, motorists, and visitors have no choice but to look at as they navigate through the city. This last aspect of your project, like all the projects that come before us, is the one that I'd like to comment on this evening. I know that every new building is complex and expensive. It takes a lot of thinking, coordinating, compromising, and creativity to get the entitlements for and then to build a project that is successful on all fronts in terms of finances, budget, buildability, function, civic fit, marketplace performance, and aesthetic impact. So I want to start by recognizing the work that's been accomplished so far and suggest that in the course of this study session, and whatever others may follow, that improvements to your application may actually occur as a result of the new sets of eyes represented by community input. So first, there are two very singular elements on the site. It's a regular corner lot. It is an irregular corner lot that serves as a gateway to the public market mixed-use district. It's one of the last highly visible sites remaining in Emeryville. So to me, irregularities always offer a design advantage waiting to be exploited. I think you have not yet capitalized on this opportunity. The angled frontage of Shell Mound is met with a floor plan in your proposal at the moment that feels to me like an effort to avoid geometric complications at the corner and to maintain as many practical right angles as possible. If you spend any time in Paris, Rome, London, or Budapest, which I think is the most successful pedestrian city in the world, you find buildings that reinforce the street line while celebrating their corners as points of entry with distinct geometries. And I think this is what some of the staff was pointing to in their remarks about your building relative to the streets. So in this case, I could easily see a cylindrical element, for example, at the corner, accomplishing both an announcement of an entry and a way to resolve the rectangular masses intersecting at an acute angle. Adding a new geometry enriches the overall design from the street. It doesn't have to be a cylinder, but it seems that you have a chance to do something special at this corner, which would help create a gateway identity. Secondly, your floor plan creates an interior courtyard that's surrounded by 7-story high walls overlooking a pool and landscaped common area. I think this will result in a very unhappy space, almost entirely devoid of sunlight ever hitting its ground floor plane throughout the year. Now, I think some good suggestions have been made by other commissioners about potentially trying to refocus that open space so that it somehow opens to the street, whether that's on the south or the west where the sun is principally going to be. And I realize that that represents a lot of challenges as far as your main entrance and having even circulation around it, but that is somehow what you're going to have to do to make that a usable space, because I think right now it's not a usable courtyard. Thirdly, let me acknowledge that the design team has created a very clear-cut, strong syntax of base, middle, and top for their elevations on Shellmont Way and Christie. It's kind of classic pre-war vocabulary that you find up and down both sides of Central Park in New York City for similar large apartment buildings. But having accomplished this familiar and safe aesthetic sentence that would seem to offend no one, there's very little else happening on these elevations to provide the onlooker with a compelling story. I say this knowing that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but I also say it as a fellow architect and as an advocate for creativity, for originality, for inspiration, and for an architecture that is of its time, that being the second decade of the 21st century. So I know that as an architect, my first responsibility, or one of my first responsibilities, is to meet the agenda of my client. And most of my clients want to keep construction costs under control. I know another of my responsibilities is securing timely entitlements for my client, which is usually a collaborative proposition between the development team, planning department, and planning commission, and most importantly, the community. So I think I'm a pretty good architect, but I know there are designers all around me that have creative capacities, which I can benefit greatly from. So whatever direction your client has given you, the message we have for you tonight is to reach in and reach out for the most creative architecture you can summon. Because our profession is fundamentally collaborative, I encourage you to even consider working together with any of the exceptional design talents that surround us throughout the Bay Area. I find that I'm always happy to share credit on something that is better than claiming credit solely for something that could be better. So we want to be impressed. We want to be shocked at the creative effort you can put into this highly visible site. We do not want to be stewards of mediocrity in our city. There is no pre-war legacy that you need to correspond to in your architectural solution. We don't need you to create a building that looks like a factory. There's no overarching conservative mindset in our community that you need to placate. Our expectations are much higher than that. You are asking of us support for approving a project beyond its by right allowances for unit count. On principle, I support that kind of unit count, that high-density urban solution, which really is an answer to so many of the challenges in our century. But we are asking of you that you produce the best creative design possible from your team in terms of your footprint, how it addresses the corner, the richness and texture of your material palette, the dynamic composition of your elevations, resolution of your details, how you solve the issue of sunlight to your courtyard, and how your building meets the sky. So we're asking you to deliver us the landmark that the site deserves. Thanks very much.
You've inspired me. Very impressive. I feel like I'm back in school and just got critiqued.
Thank you.
I've
got a question for the overall commission. This site is begging for a high-rise. much of what was said tonight could be solved on a smaller footprint, on an acre and a half. We would need a fairly sizable garage, though, if we were going to build, I'll just throw it out, 12, 14, 16, 18 stories, something in that range. Is that something that is supportable in this community, on this commission, at the council? Because one of the ways you can solve some of the issues that Commissioner Keller brought up with circulation and so on gets solved if you reduce your footprint and go higher.
Are you talking about a higher unit count?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because the garage would get pretty big. I mean, I'm thinking, we have a garage back there now, tucked up against the city's building. We could do I'm thinking a floor plate that, maybe it's 12 to 15 units of floor. Maybe on the corner with something cylindrical, as you suggested. It's kind of begging for that with the garage kind of where it's currently on the site. But that's just kind of spitballing with you. If that's something, because it is a very prominent site, it is kind of begging for a high-rise. We'd have to study the market a little bit to make sure that the rents would support the additional construction costs, but I just wanted to find out from you if you thought that was something that might be viable here.
Okay, I'm not going to hold my tongue anymore. Yes. You would have my vote in a minute. And I feel not confident, but I feel pretty sure you would have the mayor's support. The mayor and I have had conversations, and I've actually had a meeting with Gensler about why we're not getting high rises in this city. And that meeting was directed by Scott Donahue. So I don't know. I haven't had a recent conversation with him, but I think he would support the idea. I definitely would support the idea. You could get much more public open space with the high rise when you can bring that footprint of the building in to a little bit. And I don't think a 12-story building, even 14, is that big of a deal in that location. I mean, I live in a 30-story building, and I don't think we're ever going to see a 30-story building in this town again. But I could definitely see 12 to 14 stories without a problem.
Is there anything in the planning, in the general plan, that would militate against that?
Not at all. This is the core area of the city. There's no absolute height limit. The height is really just constrained by things like FAR and other parameters, but in terms of an actual number, there's no absolute height limit here. Any building over 100 feet tall has to get 100 bonus points, no matter what other attributes it may have. There's also things about wind and separation from other high-rises and things like that. But this is the zone of the city where high-rises are envisioned.
And he already needs 100 bonus point, do they not?
Yes.
So that's not an additional factor.
Right.
I realize that, a function of entitlements for you is time that it takes to get the entitlement, which means how many hearings you have to have and so forth. So I'm sure the faster you get through them, the happier you're going to be. But for this situation, you may want to come back to us with really very conceptual massing models and not worry about details per se or even fenestration, just to show us where you're thinking of what the options are that you're looking at that we can talk about with you.
One of the reasons I ask this question is if you do turn Shell Mound Way one way and then again one way, we're only going to have one way in and out of the site. And so I think coming down Christie and going in right into a parking garage, if we had a high-rise, would work much better than having an 8-story with, we'll have to widen out that access point because what we're showing on the drawings currently is too narrow. Probably need to have a right-hand turn lane coming out and so on. It probably needs more room, but we'd be forcing all the cars underneath the building versus putting them dedicated into the parking garage, which we could still put lifts in, so we wouldn't have to make it overly sized. But it's something we would be happy to study in just kind of in a blocking, massing kind of way, and we could come back to you, no problem.
Just so you understand, the one way would not predicate. You could still have an entry on Shellman, and you could still have an entry on Christie.
I know, it's just people have to go all the way down around and get in. They probably aren't, they're probably going to more go, that's all I'm suggesting.
Or if they came off the freeway at Showmount north of town and
True.
came down Christie, they can come in that way.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, once you live in a neighborhood, you learn the ins and
I
outs.
know the tricks to get in and out, yeah. Well, if you're up for some additional study on that, we'd be happy to do it. And we could come back to you again, maybe with some of the, Dave will do double duty. He doesn't have anything to do.
Well, we're going to decide on the product.
Well, but I think what I'm hearing you say is there is some potential openness to it. Nothing in the code prevents it necessarily.
Yeah, I would support a high-rise as long as it's the best high-rise ever built in the country, yeah.
Made that clear.
Yeah.
I would also support a taller building if it had an impressive creative design.
Okay.
I was really impressed with Commissioner Banta's eloquence, and I think that that is a space where we could do something that's really special and spectacular, and as long as it is a wonderful creative form and meets the street well and meets the sidewalk and has public space and access that's activated and meets the sky well and doesn't have a big pit in the middle, that would be good.
I think Pacific Park Plaza's had its due in terms of the structure that takes up our skyline. I think we're ready to move on to something that gives our city more prominence.
And that's when they don't make it look like Pacific Park Plaza. I live in that building, but I wish I could change it.
I saw the photographs that Phil took, and they don't look like that building. They're much more San Francisco sort of contemporary. And if we got to build it out of lightweight concrete and steel anyway, we can do curtain wall glass and things you can't do when you're building stick. So we would certainly be willing to look at it if you'd like us to.
Please do.
Okay. Yes?
A couple of things. One is, this probably goes without saying, but I think it's worth noting that there is a fairly long road ahead for this project. Obviously, we're going to have to do CEQA review. At this point, we don't know if that's going to be a mitigated neg deck or an EIR, but it is, certainly not going to be exempt. So we'll have to do traffic studies and all those other kinds of good things. So this will be a rather lengthy process to get to an entitlement, and the applicant is certainly aware of that. The other thing I would just request of the commission is if you could just take a minute to address the questions that we've put up there for you. I think you've touched on most of them, but it would be helpful to us and the applicant if we could get some consensus on especially the first one. But also on the other issues.
We start at one side, or?
Why don't I just ask on the first one, on the general plan amendment, is there anybody that would be opposed to a general plan amendment that would keep the road where it is? Seems like we have consensus on that.
All right.
The mix of uses, any comments?
I like that it's mixed use, and I'd like to see at least 10,000 square feet, if not more. I think that's a minimum, because that's subdividable into 3 spaces or 2 or something like that. But yeah, more space would be nice, but that would be a minimum for me.
Yeah, agreed. That was part of the comment that I made earlier.
And then do you have any pressing community benefits, needs that you'd like us to think about? Because we're rookies, so we're not sure exactly what's really important to the community right now.
Let me, if I may, quickly review what's in the planning regulations. There are 6 categories of community benefits. They are public open space. I've heard some possible support for that. That's dedicating a percentage of the site to public open space. Zero net energy. This project might have some potential for that. That's an all or nothing category. Yeah. If you do zero net energy, you get 50 points. If you don't, you get 0. Public improvements, that's sort of a catch-all. But, and again, all of these things are things that are beyond normal requirements or mitigation measures. So if there's something that an EIR says you have to do, you don't get bonus points for that. If it's curb gutter sidewalk adjacent to the site, you don't get bonus points for that because that's expected. But if the applicant voluntarily says we will, repave all the streets in the neighborhood, or we'll widen the sidewalk across the street, or something like that, those kinds of things are good for public improvement bonus points. Utility undergrounding, I don't think that's applicable here because all of the utilities in this area are already undergrounded. Additional family-friendly units, that's certainly a possibility. Small business, that is, we discussed that previously with the Doyle Street Muse project. That's simply writing a check to our Economic Development Fund. And then the last one is called the Flexible Community Benefit. That is where the developer comes up with their own proposal and to see if it flies. The caveat of that is that has to be approved by the City Council. So if you go for the Flexible Community Benefit, then your project automatically requires City Council approval. So those are the 6 categories of community benefit, well, 7, but including the flexible one. And I don't think utility undergrounding is really an option here. So it's public open space, zero net energy, public improvements, additional family-friendly units, and small business contribution.
And can they have to do the affordable housing to get their first 50?
Yes.
So we're looking at 50, and can that be broken up into 40 or 20, 30 in picking, say, community benefits to get 20 points for doing whatever it is, and then public open space to get 30%?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you get
Or 30
if
points.
they need 100 points,
Yeah.
which it appears they do, 50, as you say, have to come from the affordable units. The other 50 can come from any of these categories, mix and match.
Divided up. Okay.
They don't have to all, 50 don't have to all come from one
From one,
category. You
okay.
can,
So-
well, except zero net energy. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
all or nothing.
Yeah.
So I think that as far as a community benefit goes, which may be something you have to do anyway, but the streetscape, it's been observed this evening, how challenging the sidewalk situation is for pedestrians. So I'd encourage you to look at examples, most of which are abroad, and probably about 50% of which are in Paris, for streets that are successful at making people feel great walking down them. And it usually involves some pretty significant tree planting along the edges to protect you from the cars, and cafes full of Parisians.
Or Americans who appreciate Parisians.
And the other thing, which is a community benefit, which I don't think is actually an official community benefit yet. It's not been enshrined as such, or maybe even suggested yet. But I'm on this campaign to try to encourage art galleries to come into the city of Emeryville to support its identity as a city of art. And since you have 10,000 square feet there, and art galleries are probably one of the least financially viable propositions on earth, the degree to which you might be able to support, subsidize, or otherwise make that happen may be grounds for a potential community development.
I would support that idea.
That would certainly be an option, and that, though, would trigger the flexible community benefit and the city council approval.
So stay flexible.
Yeah.
Right.
Charlie, I just got a question for you again, since we're rookies. I've always assumed that this project will go to council kind of almost no matter what, just because it's such a prominent site and...
doesn't have to.
Only if it's appealed.
Only if it gets appealed. Okay. Thank you.
Well, yeah, the general plan amendment requires council approval. Let me just talk about that for a second, if I may. I think what staff was considering is taking, now that we have the consensus of the commission that the general plan amendment is supportable, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here, but I think we would probably want to go to the city council for a study session on the project so that they know what it is, but mainly to take their temperature on the general plan amendment. And then go to the, then a general plan amendment, as you know, has to come through the planning commission first and then go to the city council. So I would think we can process that separately. And then once that's general plan amendment is approved, then then there's a big question mark is erased, and then the project can move forward for planning commission approval. On the other hand, if the applicant wants to do a flexible community benefit and is assuming it requires council approval anyway, we can also go that route. But the idea was to take the general plan amendment to the council and see how it flies at a study session. If they support it, then go through the general plan amendment process.
I think that's a good route to take myself.
I think that makes sense. And I would want to put in my 2 cents for public open space on the benefits.
We've heard that loud and clear.
Okay.
And I think we have your comments on the design concept. So
Can I
is there
just,
anything else?
I kind of want to give my the order of which I would like these public community benefits. So first is public improvements for bike ped connections or sidewalk improvements, something that would make it pedestrian friendly in that area. Second would be public open space. Third would be zero net energy, and I guess in competition with third would be the flex developer proposal.
I'm pretty much on board with that order.
Yeah, I want to echo that in the exact order. This area is in dire need of more pedestrian and bicycle-friendly amenities. And so in terms of activating this neighborhood and making it safer and friendlier and livable, that's number one. Yeah.
Okay.
Check out Budapest.
At dinner tonight, somebody, it might have been Jerry or Kevin, said one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I've never had a chance to see it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you guys
you.
very much.
Anything else? We really appreciate all your input, and we'll see you soon, hopefully.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You guys want this?
Yeah, we got one.
Double.
Okay, with that, what we have left is commissioner comments. Are there any?
I think Commissioner Banta made comments for all of us.
I think he
I say
deserves a
bravo.
round of applause. That was
Commissioner
beautiful.
Banta.
Well, thank you for bearing through the whole thing.
Thank you for saying it. Anyway, okay, then we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.